I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Stay with us. We will be right back.
To the Fourth Branch program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening.
Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the Fourth Branch program. Welcome. Marcus Cicero, a Roman philosopher, in 63 BC said that any man can make mistakes, but only an idiot persists in his error. It is said that the biggest threat to any democracy is ignorance. But the big problem is sometimes the ignorant are ignorant of their own ignorance. JFK said that the ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of us all. Now, we are at a crossroad in the United States. We call it the Big Divide. It is not a new terminology, and it is not the first time that this particular expression has been used. In fact, as long as I can remember, there has always been conversation in the media, in politics, about a big divide in Washington. The past 2 years, however, it seems that not only is it a more frequent conversation, but it seems that a tangible predicament that we all in the United States of America. It is easy to point fingers. It is easy to just shrug it off and blame it on the other side. In fact, that's one of the main reasons that we've been talking about the big divide forever. And it dawns on me, maybe the big divide is not so much the making of the differences, is not even the differences between constituent in one side of the political spectrum, Democrat versus Republican, but rather the making of the politician in order to continue to divide the country for their own personal gain. Far-fetched? Hardly, as we will dive today in the conversation to prove that it seems, or at least it's shaping in a way that tells us maybe, just maybe, we can get rid of the big divide if only all the constituents, all the American constituents belonging in both political parties come to realize that the big divide is, after all, a problem for the politicians. Today we will continue the conversation of debating, of course, race relations in America, as well as discussing the state of affairs in the country, more specifically, the state of our democracy. We have said for 2-3 years now that America is in crisis. Of course, the very fact of pointing that out seems to suggest that the very problem, or at least the individual responsible for the problem, is Donald Trump. Now, this is not a defense of Donald Trump to say he's not solely responsible for the predicament the country is in. It is a predicament we've been talking about for well before Donald Trump even fathomed the idea of bidding for the presidency of the United States. We've acknowledged that he has exacerbated the situation, but if we're looking for a solution to the problem, we cannot focus our attention on Donald Trump, because well after Donald Trump leaves the Oval Office, the problem will still be with us. It was before Donald Trump. In fact, it was around for quite some time, for many decades now. And there is no expectation that when Donald Trump walks away from the Oval Office, however that happened, all of a sudden the big divide will also evaporate or disappear. Unlikely. You see, the erosion of democracy in the United States is caused by many factors, most of which could be avoided, all of which were not caused by some foreign entities or enemies. Although most Americans shrugged off the idea that US could someday lose the freedom we've all enjoyed for over 2 centuries, one must not be naive to think that it cannot happen, especially considering the problem comes from within. You see, since the creation of the Republic, presidential elections have always been a time for those who aspire to lead the country to outline their vision for a better future and present their plans to solve lingering problems until, of course, 2016. Such a departure from an individual who is supposed to make life better should at the very least be a warning sign that we are heading in the wrong direction. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Donald Trump is not the problem. He's a symptom of the problem. He's the face now of the problem, because it's easy to simply point fingers and blame Donald Trump as the culprit for every ill that the country is going through. It is, of course, easy to do so, and besides, Donald Trump makes it easy for everyone who doesn't like what's going on in the country to simply blame him for it. Interestingly enough, even ironic, that Donald Trump seems to enjoy that, seems to enjoy the fact that everybody blames him for what's going on. The more attention it gets for the problem that's being caused, and the more that he seems to want to cause more problems. Now, I must say in all fairness, Donald Trump could not possibly cause all the problems that the country is going through. First, because of what I said earlier, that those problems have been around before Donald Trump bid for the office of the presidency. Now, considering his ways, the way that he is, a no-nonsense guy who says whatever comes to mind. It doesn't matter who he impacts with his words. It doesn't matter who he affects. It doesn't matter who he insults. He just speaks the way that he wants to speak. Now, most of those who voted for Donald Trump and supported him today claim that they like the way he is because he says whatever he wants to say, and that's the reason they like him. Ironically, quite ironically, a few of those same people who've been watching this program walk away from it because, well, they don't like to hear someone speak very bluntly about the state of affairs when it comes to either race relation or any other problem in the country. So in other words, individuals who seem to think that they know what they know, they know what they think, and they know what they want, turns out to be individuals who are very conflicted, because you cannot possibly like the idea of someone being so straightforward, so nonchalant about the way that he approaches everybody that he speaks with. So no matter what comes to his mind, he just blurts it out. If indeed that's what liked, then conversation about race relations shouldn't be that, should it? And yet, from the feedback that I get from quite a few of the individuals who watch this program, either live or the video, it seems that they do not feel as the same way about the race relations discussion as they do feel about Donald Trump simply insulting other people. In other words, if it's others, that's okay. We like it because, hey, he says it what it is, like it is. How about a conversation about race relation exactly how it is? So the big divide gets me to think that the big problem that we have in the country is not really caused by the fact that we have so many differences among constituents, but rather politicians have so many differences or so many ways that they want to keep their job and not do anything, that they invent some big divide and promote it as a way to keep constituents from realizing that indeed the country is going through this predicament it's going through because the politician create that problem. Want examples? Mitt Romney was governor of Massachusetts, and during his tenure there as governor, he implemented a universal health care in Massachusetts, where everyone was covered. Everyone had health care. If you work, You either get health care from your workplace, from your employer, or if you, for some whatever reason, you don't want to, then you can buy health care from the state. But everyone was covered. Now, if at the end of the year when you file your taxes, for whatever reason you work and you're not covered, there will be a penalty that the government, Massachusetts, will assess on that individual, a way of saying you contributing to that system, which is healthcare for everyone. In case you don't know, Mitt Romney is a Republican. Now, across the nation, at that time, you may not remember, because memory, is very finicky things when it comes to politics. Across the nation, all the Republicans, senators, congressmen, governors, mayors, they all applauded the fact that not only a Republican governor implemented a universal healthcare system, it worked. Everyone was covered. Everyone was on the system. And there was no argument that was a good thing until Obama became president, when he proposed the exact same thing. Not even widespread that way, because there were so many different ways that the administration proposed to implement the policy, Obamacare that is, in order for everyone across the country to be covered, to have health care. In case you didn't know, Obama is a Democrat. As you can see, we're talking about the exact same thing, nothing different. Universal health care implemented by a Republican in a state that clearly proves it worked. Republicans applauded that. That's great. Now, that's something we can all at least take a look at and see whether we're able to implement that from across the board. But when Obama proposed the exact same thing, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Republicans were against universal health care. The big divide is a made-up story by Republican legislators in order to keep their job, to keep the constituent divided, because it helps them keep their job. So Obamacare was a death panel. All of a sudden, there were so many bad things about the exact same plan, the exact same health care. It was implemented locally in Massachusetts. Now Obama simply proposed it for the nation. All of a sudden, it becomes a bad thing. The big divide has nothing to do with the constituent not liking or not wanting, but rather the Republican legislators who campaign against the other side, no matter how beneficial it is for the country. You will find Republican legislators would campaign against it in order to divide the constituent, so that they can have something to talk about against the other side, in that case the Democrats. So that's the big divide in the United States. Just a side note, we decided, of course starting today, to bring the jeopardy to discuss the crisis our country is going through by discussing every so often different subtopics under the banner of the big divide, to show that that crisis is a man-made crisis created almost exclusively by Republican legislators, because it facilitates, it creates opportunities for them to be able to divide the constituent who, interestingly enough, ironically, are very naive and very gullible. They believe everything their legislators tell them. They go along with it, even when it's blatantly false and wrong. And that we will also bring example to show that the big divide in the country, the crisis the country is going through, is created almost exclusively by Republican legislators and elected officials. Now, to continue on the example of Obamacare, they say it was a death panel. Now, when they argue that yes, it worked in the principle worked in Massachusetts, but it may not work nationwide. Why not? Why would it not? Now, we would never know that it would not work, it cannot work, and the reason for that is because all the Republican governors completely blocked the Healthcare Act. Now, this is the normal, the expression Obamacare was introduced by Republicans, not in a good way. It was supposed to be a derogatory type of expression, which simply say it's bad. And it's thick, obviously, and up to today we continue to refer to the Healthcare Act that was passed by the Obama administration as Obamacare. Now, we know it worked in Massachusetts. It's still the same Healthcare Act, the same universal health care implemented by former Governor Mitt Romney in Massachusetts, worked well, so well that even his successors continue to continue to use the same act. But when Obama, realizing that great, Republican implemented a universal health care in a state, it's working fine, so the very next thing that he did, he called upon those individuals who were part of crafting, of the architecting of that Healthcare Act in Massachusetts to help with Obamacare. Pretty much duplicating, if you like, at a national level what was successful at a state level. But because automatically Republican legislators in Washington realized that if we let that happen, what are we going to argue next about? What are we going to be fighting next? What are we going to tell our constituents to be against? The big divide is made up by Republican legislators, elected officials, in order to always have a way to fight against Democrats. If you recall, during Obama's 8 years in office, Republicans tried 62 times to repeal Obamacare. That was a futile exercise, but they did anyway. But the irony of the whole exercise that all the Republicans in Washington were having, they never tried once during that time to come up with anything just in case that Obama was to sign. Okay, you want to repeal it? I'll sign. Then what do you have? The answer was absolutely nothing. It is not just a statement that Republicans created a divide between Democrats and Republicans and their constituents in order to always have something to give to their Republican constituent to fight against, to be against. Not because they have anything better to show, not because they have anything better to replace what they are arguing against, but they have to argue against something. That's the big divide in the United States, courtesy of the Republican legislators.
After reading several books based on presidents and on Obama specifically, I found that they're typically partisan. The Obama legacy targets the heart of the issue by giving credit to President where it's due, but it does definitely come down hard Obama on his bigger failures, like him handling serious crisis.
If you are in college, going to college, you are an educator, a faculty member, or someone with interest in government or politics, the Obama legacy is definitely a book to read.
My professor recommended the Obama legacy.
A friend actually recommended the Obama legacy.
I would highly recommend this book for anyone, whether for academic use or leisure reading.
I would recommend this book to anyone out there searching for an impartial and unbiased look into Barack Obama's tenure as president.
I would definitely recommend this book as a good read for both liberals and conservatives.
When a black voice is raised in protest to oppression, those who are comfortable with our oppression are the first to criticize us for daring to speak out against it. When a black voice is raised in protest of oppression to oppression, those who are comfortable with our oppressions are the first to criticize us for daring to speak out against it. Harry Belafonte said that. Hello everyone, I am MD and welcome to War on Blacks, a topic in which we discuss race relations in America. If you've watched for the first time, either now or this video, let me set the stage for you. Today we are at the point where we're discussing the Civil War. We will get to that in a moment. But this program in particular is a way to debate the issues of racism, discrimination in America. we have taken this step because we realize that slavery was abolished in 1865, and yet more than a century later, racism, discrimination rampant in America. How could that possibly be? Well, we've identified two major groups responsible for that problem. Well, actually, two major groups, which makes solving the problem somewhat difficult. And those two groups, they are large, very large groups. On the one hand, we have millions of whites who are racist and who discriminate. And on the other, we have also millions of whites who are not racist and who do not discriminate. There's the dilemma. The biggest part of the problem is there is no way to know who is racist, who is not. There was a time when we could look south and say most whites who live there, who live on that part of the world, of this country, are racist. And the reason we could make that blanket statement is because most people in the South, the South was mostly where slavery thrived, where whites were okay with blacks being slaves. They were pro-slavery. So we could say without any hesitation that that was the case. Unfortunately, it is no longer possible to say that because, well, there have been a lot of migration across the country with people leaving the South, going north, going east, going west, and people leaving north, east, and west, going south. So it is impossible to meet any white individual anywhere in the country and claim that that person is racist or he's not. So we've acknowledged the difficulty of race relation in America. We've also acknowledged the fact that any individual living today, black and white, or white, was not around during slavery. Again, slavery was abolished in 1865, so it is very unlikely that anyone who is alive today would have been there at that time. But what is certain, that individuals who are white individuals who are descendant of slave ownership, slave owners, they cannot wash their hands off this topic. They cannot say slavery is over, I wasn't there, I have nothing to do with it. To the contrary. I pointed out several times here that since we are at the point that we are crossing that huge bridge called the Civil War, then we will be able to talk in more detail to show the relationship between those whose ancestors were slave owners as to why they cannot wash their hands off slavery and live as if they have nothing to do with it and they're not responsible at all for the predicament blacks are in today. We have a few factors that we discuss and say that we ought to recognize in order to solve racism and discrimination in America. One, we have to recognize that racism and discrimination rampant in America. Unless that's recognized, then there is no possibility of solving or eradicating this problem, this plague from the country. Two, we have to, of course, understand the problem. And that's what we're trying to do by going to the era in which slavery was accepted, condoned, even promoted, in order to understand the dynamic, the interactions between blacks and whites, and walk our way towards modern time, and in the process walk the path of whites who harbor resentment against blacks, and try to understand where that came from, and of course vice versa, and try to shed some light as to whether even those resentments are justified. Now, we acknowledge also this is not an easy conversation, especially for we've seen the reaction of individuals, both blacks and whites, about this particular topic. That's the reason it's not talked about. That's the reason everybody avoids it, because it is a difficult topic to talk about, because of the fact that blacks are very inclined, especially blacks who are knowledgeable of black history in this country in particular, they are inclined to be emotional about the whole thing. Whites, on the other hand, are more inclined to be defensive about the whole issue, because, and for good reason, especially those who came who are from a lineage of slave ownership. Tend to be defensive, because if you're talking about slavery, then all of a sudden they feel that they have to be on the defensive because we're talking about them. Now, the purpose of this, while it is almost impossible not to put the blame where it belongs, on the slave owners, and of course if you are descendant of slave owners, then you are concerned about the conversation, and it's understandable why you are on the defensive, why you would be on the defensive. But again, there cannot be any solution to any problem unless the problem is recognized, acknowledged, and identified, and the problem is understood. And we are at the point where we're trying to establish that understanding. And of course, the last part of solving the problem would be for the concerned parties to communicate and hash out the detail why that problem still around, still exists, and what can be done to get rid of it. And there is no way of solving the problem just by being silent, by avoiding to talk about the problem, by shunning it, by pretending it no longer. Slavery ended in 1865 officially. we're still talking about racism and discrimination, despite the fact, and in fact, it's because of the fact that everyone involved, everyone concerned avoids talking about it. Because somehow it seems to be believed that by not talking about it, it doesn't exist. It's like one of those things, if you close your eyes, the monster in the room will disappear. Well, if there is a monster in the room, whether your eyes are open or closed, the monster is still in the room. And that monster is racism. Not talking about the monster will not make the monster disappear. Pretending the monster is not around will not make the monster disappear. Yes, we have to acknowledge that there is this problem, and it's widespread. As I mentioned prior, it's not the white nationalists, it's not the white supremacists, it's not the KKK. It is a widespread problem across the nation, in all corners of our society. No matter where you look, whether it's at the workplace, on the street, at the church even, it is widespread. One aspect of racism that I personally am concerned in debating these details in order to get to that is institutionalized racism. The racist next door would not impact my life. Doesn't change my name, doesn't change my financial situation, doesn't change my health, doesn't change anything about me. So it doesn't matter whether my white neighbor doesn't like blacks. Does not impact me at all. But I'm concerned about institutionalized racism because not only it would impact my life, but it impacts a whole system. It impacts blacks in general, not just this generation, but generation after generation. Look at 1865, slavery over, and yet we're still talking about racism. It's because it has been institutionalized. Institutionalized racism is a system which nurtures, condones, or even promotes racist behavior, actions, and languages. That's institutionalized racism. A good example that I use over and over and over, Mitch McConnell trying to place on the federal bench a known openly racist judge in North Carolina. That's institutionalized racism. So every time you have an individual who is racist and you promote that individual to a higher position, all you're doing is helping to keep institutionalized racism. In other words, getting rid of racism is not really a complex thing. It's people in position of power, wherever that is, who would work towards eliminating, eradicating, discarding individuals who are non-racist and say you no longer have a post in this organization, whether it's a government or a company. By doing that, then you are weeding out the racist, those who discriminate, and sooner or later they will have only two options: stay racist and pretty much be antisocial because they will not have their place in society, or change in order to integrate within society. Yes, it is possible, it can happen first we have to recognize that a number of individuals in positions of power, whether it's the government or private organization, they are responsible, their actions in helping the institutionalization of racism. Now, it's difficult to argue you're not racist if you're helping institutionalize racism. It's very difficult to argue that, because words are worth nothing. Your actions speak very loud. So your action will dictate who you are, what you are. If you're helping institutionalizing racism, by definition, you are a racist. Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth French program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth French programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is trifold. One, to bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. Two, to expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. Three, to extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussion of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Shaw exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man. The maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or, would you please get out of the way? Thank you. Dawn of the Civil War, 1860. In the South, there were approximately 9 million. The population was a total of 9 million. 3.5 million slaves, more than 1/3 of the population. When Abraham Lincoln became president of the United States, 16th president of the United States, the South was in panic mode. And the reason is because they knew exactly where he stood. They knew exactly how he felt about slavery. So they knew that how the movie will end. and they quickly decided to do something, and that something was to go to the extreme by splitting the country. Yes, in order to keep slavery around. Now I want you to take a look at what it means if you are a descendant of slave owners. What that story tells you. Because you certainly have stories that were passed down to you by parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and so on, that passed down information. They didn't just pass down wealth that they accumulated on the back of blacks. They didn't just pass that. They also passed down stories. You heard anecdotes. You heard sometimes we'd call it even fairy tale that you grew up in, and you may have internalized those stories. And of course, when I say you, not necessarily starting from really further into your ancestry, great grandparent, and then passing that down all the way to you, where the information that you have in terms of interaction between blacks and whites seems to be blacks were the aggressors. That's conversation that I have with individuals. I cannot know for certain whether they come from a lineage of slave owners, because most would not divulge the information. But regardless of their circumstances, and it is a predicament that today we see that blacks continue to suffer because of those very stories, those anecdotes, those sentiments. You would say it's a permanent grudge that whether it was crafted or it simply happened and it's passed down from one generation to the next, but up to today we have white individuals, when they talk about blacks, you would have a sense that as if blacks were the aggressors and whites were the victims during slavery. And that's the reason I strongly believe that their ancestors passed deliberately bad, false information down to the next generation, who continue to pass those false information, and which today would make the individual, the white individual, who he or she is. A good way to explain that is as follows. Nat Turner was a slave. He was probably the perfect example of a slave, because he was born in slavery. He was sold 3 times First, as a baby, because the white slave owners saw slave who gave birth as almost the same way today people who invest in the stock market. If a new stock, a promising stock, especially pharmaceutical stock, pharmaceutical company comes around, then they automatically see that as an opportunity for them to invest right away, so that if something good come out of that pharmaceutical company, then they can make a fortune out of it. White slave owners pretty much had a similar approach to slave to slave who gave birth to babies, who gave birth to slave babies. So they took Nat Turner and sold him as a baby, and again as a young man, just coming of age, what you would call teenager here, maybe 12, 13 years old, was sold again to another slave owner. But that time, of course, the slave owner who purchased him must have seen that not only they could put him to good use, but at the same time, if at some point they have no more use for him, they could again sell him. And that's exactly what happened. And they sold him a third time. And the last time that they sold Nat Turner, it was to a slave owner by the name of John Travis. So Nat Turner was merchandise, property that was sold, baby, child, and then as a young man. Now, at no point did any of those slave owners see anything wrong with that. Now, the part that I did not mention, which I said before and I'll say it again, I strongly encourage you to go to the People Branch YouTube channel. And the way that you get to it is by going to youtube.com. As you see on this screen in front of you, you go to youtube.com, and on the search bar you type People Branch, one word. Step 1, you go to youtube.com. Step 2, you type on the search bar People Branch, one word. And on image 1, as you see on the left hand side, you have the logo for the People Branch. And of course, if you click on it, then it will give you what you see on the right hand side, which is a list of all the video that's currently on the People Branch YouTube channel. And there you can look for video that's under race relation, war on blacks, and institutionalized racism. If the topic that you are interested in is that, then that's where you will find it under. Now, Nat Turner, as I mentioned, was sold 3 times as a slave. And under John Travis, he was beaten until he bled. He was forced to work 18 hours a day. Sometimes he was purposely starved to death so that the slave master could teach him a lesson. At no point in that story that I just mentioned to you did any of the slave owners consider what they were doing was wrong. Normal course of affair for them: trading slaves, beating slaves, torturing slaves, working them to death, starving them to death, To them, that was okay, but the information that were passed down from one generation to the next of white slave owners, they passed down that information to the next generation as if blacks were the aggressors. And that's why whites label blacks as violent and criminal. Despite what I just mentioned, they were slaves, tortured, starved to death, beat until they bled. And yet, whites propagandize across the South that blacks are criminal, blacks are violent. Even up to today, we've seen it. It still follow hot blacks. Police officer killed an unarmed black man on the street. He said, I was afraid for my life. Nothing has changed. The same thing continues. How could a police officer, an armed police officer, kill an unarmed black individual and he was afraid for his life? Go explain that. But very easy defense to get away with, because over and over and over again, the perpetrators of the crimes got away with it. So, great defense. I was afraid for my life. White slave owners in the South, that's what they spread across the South. Despite the fact they were the criminals, the monsters, but they passed down from one generation to the next that blacks were the criminals. Blacks are violent. But as mentioned before, there have always been in the United States of America two large groups of whites: those who are racist, who discriminate, and those who are not racist and who do not discriminate. As such, the same thing was during slavery. There were, at least that we know of now, 9 million individuals, 6 million of which were slave owners, racists, couldn't care less about blacks. Black could be killed just like any animal, and that would be just fine. It was just a black man. What's the difference today? Police officer kill, execute a black man, unload his weapon on a black man. I was afraid for my life. That's all he needs to say. And hey, that was a black man. Yes, war on blacks causing a lot of casualties on the black side. Yes, I understand it's a difficult topic to hear about, and that's the reason I start seeing a lot of the very individual who supposed to be concerned about that very fact. They're the one fleeing the scene because they don't want to hear about that war on blacks. Of course not. Solving problem requires an acknowledgement, requires an understanding, and requires action, communication between the parties. So just say, let's solve the race relation problem, but let's not talk about it. I don't know how that's going to work. Solving it by not talking about it. Abraham Lincoln, the gentleman you're looking at, was the president who gambled his political career to put an end to a disgusting practice. those politicians don't exist anymore. Now they only see themselves. Look at the Republicans today. They're dancing on their head in order to keep their job. They're not shielding Donald Trump because they love Donald Trump so much. We know that because we reported that those people, they're talking so bad about Donald Trump behind closed doors. So it's not their love for Donald Trump. We know that. But they're not going to take a stand against what's wrong. Because as far as they're concerned, they want to keep their job. They don't care about any country. We know that. They already proved that over and over and over again. Abraham Lincoln gambled his political career. He was the president of the United States. White man, he didn't have to. But he was a decent individual that resented the practice of slavery. Abraham Lincoln said, "As I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master." That's my definition of democracy. As I would not be a slave, I would not be a master. Abraham Lincoln decided to put an end to that evil practice that millions of whites in the South thought we could be Christian and have slaves. We could be Christian and torture them. We could be Christian and starve them to death. We could be Christian and execute them. We could be Christian and hang them. Yes, there have always been in the United States of America whites who are racist and who discriminate. And those individuals, they left a legacy of such individual, similar, continuing on their path, on the same path that their ancestors follow. They following the same path rather. When their ancestors killed a black man or black slave at that time, there was no price to pay, there was no account for, and nothing to worry about. It was a black slave. Today, a police officer executes an unarmed black man. There is this semblance of justice. We're going to court. The end result is always obvious. The officer walks. After all, he is a white man who killed a black man. Yes, war on blacks is not just a banner. It is not just a title. It's not for sensationalizing the topic. It is to point to the fact that casualties have been mounting on the black side. Heavy casualties, physical casualties, emotional casualties. When a black man is gunned down by a police officer, it's not just a physical casualty. Left behind families, kids, emotional casualties. For the mother to explain to the children as to why they no longer have father. Psychological casualties. And to struggle financially because now there is no more breadwinner. financial casualties. Yes, it is real. It is not some stories some movies you're watching. The war on blacks is real and is causing a lot of casualties. It didn't end with the end of slavery. It is continuing, and society is just turning a blind eye. Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth French program. War on blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth French programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. One, to bring attention to various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. Two, to expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. Three, to extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussion of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Shaw exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man. The maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. I do thank you to have spent the time with me, and I hope you found the program interesting and enlightening. If you have any question, suggestion, comments, criticism, please do not hesitate to contact us. Should you have a topic you would like us to talk about, we'd like to hear about it. We'll research it and talk about it here on the Fourth French. In the meantime, we hope you have a wonderful afternoon and hope to see you again tomorrow at 2 p.m. Good day.
The Fourth French podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch application, which can be found on the People Branch website, located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchenne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the fourth branch, live from New York. Good day.